Great, thank you. So welcome to the next 1.5 hours, and we will be talking about ethics and compliance. The 1.5 hours will be split into 2 panels of 45 minutes each. So this is our first panel here. The way that we will try to do it is that for each panel, we will have 2 rounds of questions. And then, as mentioned, there is the QR code. So if you wish to ask a question, please use it to do so. And we will try to have some time at the end for your questions. So as you can see, we have for this first panel 3 panelists. We have Kamel Ayadi, who's here in the center, who is an international consultant and former Minister of Anti-Corruption and Governance, and he is also Globethics MENA Regional Counsel, amongst other things. We have Malika, who is Senior Advisor to the Director General of the WHO. And next to me, we have Maximilien Roche, who is founder of Rock Integrity and Investigations, among other things. They all have very rich backgrounds that they will tell you about a little bit by themselves, because they can do a better job than me. Also in the interest of time, I will just dive into the first question, which is the same for all 3, okay? Could you please briefly explain your role or background to us, so we have a better understanding of where you're coming from, and tell us, what do the words ethics and compliance mean to you? What do they inspire you? And interestingly, do you see ethics and compliance as 2 separate topics, or do they go hand in hand? And relatedly, where would you say, or can we even draw the line between these 2 topics of ethics and compliance?
Thank you for these 3 questions in one. So, indeed, I am WHO Director General Senior Advisor on Ethics, partially, but I lecture a lot on ethics and anti-corruption in different contexts. And my story starts by a decade of fighting corruption in aid and being an auditor and an investigator on a corruption scheme. And ultimately, being a practitioner, I became a lecturer. And I started at the International Anti-Corruption Academy. Why? Because it's a group of police officer, investigator, auditor. And why did I opt for that kind of teaching? Because when you lecture on how to deconstruct a corruption scheme, you give the menu. You explain how to construct a corruption scheme. So I realized while teaching on anti-corruption that there is no way you can educate on corruption scheme if you don't combine 2 ethics. So that's how I started to work on ethics in different capacities. I have to say that when I was invited to come to this conference, I had clarity on my message. But more I listen to the different panel, more I get confused. I think it's the beauty of such conversation, because it does challenge the thinking. And so what is the definition you are looking for? Ethics, I would say, I understand that the organizer, Globethics, is the largest provider on open data library on ethics. So I was said 3.5 million download on ethics, and congratulations to Globethics for that. So somehow, if you want a definition, no doubt you will find a definition in the database of Globethics. But when it comes to ethics, when I need to explain to my sisters, for instance, what is ethics, of course, people look at ethics as being a glamorous work. Oh, you do ethics, it's glamorous. You speak of philosophy, philology, morality, etc. Technically, the ethics portfolio in international organization is very technical. We will look at that later on. So I use this anecdote. You find a wallet with 10 euros, 10 Swiss francs, $10 in the toilet, let's say. What do? There is no ID card and no witness. What do you do with the wallet? Do you bring it to the police station or to the office of forgotten items? Do you keep it for yourself? There is no witness and no ID card in the wallet? Or do you assume that the person who lost it will find a way to find the wallet? Whatever the response is, I would say the rationalization you have used to decide what to do will codify your personal ethical framework. So that's the kind of things I would refer to. So to your last question on the line between ethics compliance, I think from my experience in the UN system, there is a real difference between ethics and compliance. We will look at later on. But technically, ethics and compliance are two different portfolios. So we will look at that later on.
Thank you, Malika. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this highly topical issue. I'm a former civil servant, and I worked as a technocrat and policymaker in various fields, including governance and anti-corruption. I worked also in civil society work, and I have led a number of global initiatives in developing anti-corruption efforts throughout the world. So to return to your question about the line between ethics and compliance, we hear often about the reconciliation between compliance and ethics. And I wouldn't say that compliance and ethics need to be reconciled, as there is no antagonism between both of them. They complement each other. They need to be combined and brought together to guide human behaviors towards desirable actions. So ethics and compliance, they pursue the same goal. This goal is to guide human behaviors, particularly in areas where the risk of misconduct is high. But ethics and compliance, they act through different approaches. Ethics is about doing things right, whereas compliance is about doing the right things. So in the context of anti-corruption, compliance and ethics, they work towards promoting anti-corruption efforts, but they work they use different paths. Ethics relies much more on individuals and voluntary adherence to principles, whereas compliance relies more on rules and procedures. And of course, they use coercion. I'm talking about compliance on the broad sense of the term, compliance which is much more attached with enforcement and rules and procedure and so on. So we know that relying too much on ethics could be Ethiopian. We need to hold people accountable to some rules. But the dilemma, the question that we face when we design anti-corruption programs and policy, to what extent we can rely on compliance, on rules. Because for policymakers, it's easier to draw action plans to fight corruption relying on rules. But by doing so, they underestimate the cost of the excessive reliance on rules. And by cost, I mean the collateral damage, not the cost of resources. Because relying too much on rules and procedure can make the management complex. Adding much more rules in the management is time-consuming and it's less efficient. And sometimes it could be disastrous. And I'm speaking from experience because I have tried to understand, to study the collateral damage that policy, anti-corruption policy relying on too much on rules can cause. So compliance programs was brought 2 or 3 decades ago after the wave of prosecutions of high-ranking officials and the companies. And let me just tell you how visionaries, chief executive officers of company view the interaction between compliance and ethics in their company. I'm talking about visionaries because in my life I have encountered some visionaries, chief executive officer, when they were pushed to adopt compliance program after undergoing a number of difficult circumstances. And I can give you the example where I worked on with Siemens. 30 years ago when they adopted the compliance program. The visionary leaders, they stated it clearly from early beginning that compliance could be only a short-term solution, and that the long-term solution should be programs based on integrity and ethics. And the company should be able, within a reasonable time frame, to substitute the culture of compliance with a culture of integrity and ethics. So nowadays, the problem is we know that the line between compliance and ethics, and they need to be brought together. But the problem, how we can design program that rely on both, and what would be the optimum, because it's easy to put ourselves in different sides, to be extremist, but to know where we put the cursor, that is difficult. The optimal, this is difficult. So there is no formula in this. This depends on the culture and the specific context of the country, on the specific context of the company, to draw its program based on compliance and rules, knowing that compliance could solve the problem in a short term, but if we wanted to be successful, we needed to be within a reasonable time frame, substitute compliance with integrity. Otherwise, the cost will be heavy. Perhaps it's not obvious for some countries, but in many countries, and I have done some study in this, relying too much on compliance, on prosecution, on legals could be very dangerous sometimes, because it could lead to a number of deviations, instrumentalization of political anti-corruption political programs, particularly when the anti-corruption policies are driven by political purpose.
Thank you. I'm certainly not going to disagree with my co-panelist. My name is Maximilien Roche. I'm a lawyer by training, so I like to define concepts. I'm very happy to be on this panel. I'm also a forensic investigator since early in my career, and I've been also a compliance professional in the for-profit sector, in the non-for-profit sector. And today I'm an independent consultant, and I support board members and compliance officers to help them in their compliance practice. And also, as Malika, I'm also trying to spend as much time as I can on the side teaching and thinking about particularly white-collar crime. To me, ethics and compliance are, of course, related, and sometimes even they're used, one is used for the other. You have people in companies who are chief ethics officer or chief integrity officer, but in fact, what they're doing all day is compliance. But we are trying to distinguish between the two. So I'm going to try to think how we can draw a line. I think we can draw a line, but this has already been said, along two dimensions. One is, so first of all, what do they have in common? This has been already said by Kamel. They are reference frameworks for decision making. You refer to ethics or you refer to compliance when you need to know, should I do this or should I not do this? So reference framework for decision making, but they have two different sources. One is more moralistic, it's more value-based. Ethics is more value-based and moralistic. And compliance is more what does the official text tells me? What does the law tells me? And the other is, why do we do this? So ethics is more self-imposed. It's an intentional decision, while compliance is imposed by outside stakeholders, either the country where you operate, or sometimes it can even be a contract. So ethics is about doing what is right, and by that is basically deciding, when you have a decision to make, between what is good for you, what will create more, what is going in your interest, what will, if you're a company, what will get you the most money, basically, and what is creating harm to others. So what economists call negative externalities. So you have to think about the impact of your decisions on stakeholders and decide, okay, if I do this, I optimize my situation at the expense potentially of others. So there is a trade-off here. How much you pay your employees, how much you pay your vendors, how much you spend on toxic waste, that kind of thing. And for that, of course, there is an ethical response and a compliance response. And today, you have a lot of convergence because compliance frameworks, they exist to push individuals, companies, NGOs to do things by taking into consideration their negative externalities, the impact they have on communities. But so in many situations, doing the ethical thing and doing the compliant thing is the same, but not always. If you're a compliance officer, you're spending a lot of your time, especially over the past 2 years, dealing with sanctions and export control. And to me, this is, ethically neutral. Whose country do you do business with? This is not an ethical question, but this is a very much of a compliance topic because the compliance framework that applies to companies in Switzerland is you do business with countries which the Swiss government authorizes you to do business with, or at least you don't do business with countries and you don't deal in certain goods with certain countries or with certain individuals. This is compliance. This is arguably not an ethical issue, but this is still part of your compliance life. So most of the time, compliance and ethics converge, but not always.
Okay, thank you for those different yet similar answers, I guess, if I have to just quickly summarize. So the second question is kind of understanding the trajectory of ethics and compliance. So based on your experience, how has the approach towards ethics and compliance evolved over time? And probably importantly, how do you expect it to evolve going forward? What are some of the stakes that we should keep in mind?
So thank you for this second round of question. Before answering, I will add some comments from the first question. My experience is mainly with the UN system and international organization, and definitively in the UN system, ethics is not compliance. You have perimeter for ethics in ethics portfolio and perimeter for compliance, and most organizations don't have the two portfolio in the same office. The ethics perimeter in most of UN organizations relates to ethics advice on conflict of interest, declaration of interest, financial disclosure, that kind of things. Of course, training on ethical decision, meaning educating colleagues on what is unethical, because everybody would agree on what is ethical, and ethical decision making is described often in Code of Ethics. But technically, the way to better understand and to own the notion of ethical decision is to understand what is the mechanism for taking an unethical decision, why good people take bad decisions, and to work on cases, real cases, to transform the organization in a more ethical organization. So having said that and understanding that the perimeter is very much defined in a technical portfolio, it's not about philosophy and reflecting on morality and good things. It's really it's about putting in action a variety of mechanisms which relate to the Code of Ethics or Code of Conduct. So in terms of trajectory, I would say the 90s was about integrity. The buzzword of the 90s was integrity. The buzzword of the 2000 decade was accountability. And the buzzword of the 2010 decade was transparency, with the syndrome of hyper-transparency at the end of the decade of 2010, getting, for instance, organizations putting on their website their audit report, investigation report, this level of hyper-transparency. Definitively, the ongoing decade is about ethics. Because in most industries, ethics is close to compliance, I could say it's the decade of ethics and compliance, although I'm still convinced that that's two different businesses. So in that trajectory, as you rightly described, Siemens business case is an amazing reference one, which has very much influenced the new generation of compliance officer, because they have built a good compliance program based on the bad, bad history. The thing is, definitively, compliance has been exposed to certain norms and standards internationally as a profession. You could look at International Institute of Auditors, they have codified compliance mechanism, while ethics has a multiplicity of good provider on ethics, but it's not organized as a profession. So the trajectory is really professionalization, to build on different initiatives which are very powerful in different continents. But it has to be professionalized. Why? Because ethics is navigating in the sea where you would find the accountability stakeholder, among which you would have investigation, mediation, ombuds office, staff association, public opinion, etc. And in this accountability framework, we cannot say that the profession is regularized in a clear and shared manner across continent. Of course, there are very well-known businesses and initiatives to organize the profession of ethic and compliance officer, but it's codified along technical perimeter given in the given context, in the given continent. In some international organizations, the chief ethics officer will have to give an opinion, for instance, on the maturity of the risk universe of the organization, while in other organizations, it's much more the compliance officer who would do so. So, of course, it's easy to say it depends, but it really depends on the industry, how the ethics portfolio is addressed in the given industry, and what is the perimeter of that business, and how the profession can be organized along that. Then to answer to the last part of your second question, the global narrative, we could hear yesterday a very inspiring speaker on the multilateralism 2.0, the new alternative to multilateralism. The global narrative is about multilateralism. The reality is about fragmentation. And the question is, we can aim at having a new version to multilateralism because there is no other option. But the reality we observe every day in the business, in the world, is fragmentation. And ethics will have to dedicate more thinking on the impact of fragmentation on the labor market in the business context. That's my views.
Thank you. Thank you for this question. There is a lot to say about this, but before going to your question, I want to just to elaborate on what Malika said. There is a critical question when we talk about compliance and ethics, which is trust. When we don't trust people, we put measures, we put rules to control them. So the critical determinant of the size of a compliance program is the level of trust. And usually, what we do in companies, we try to diagnose the integrity system. We spot the gaps through which corruption can occur, talking about corruption. Then we will fill these gaps with procedure and we will make the compliance program bigger. And here is the problem, because we cannot substitute rules and compliance to trust. When we have a problem of trust, we need to restore trust. We need to create a culture of trust with values and principles, not to substitute the trust with compliance and with rules. So coming to your question, I will answer always based on my experience in fighting corruption, because this is where I see the ethics and compliance in practice. So the fight against corruption has undergone three major phases. The first phase was over the past 3 decades. The first phase was awareness raising, with the emergence of international NGOs such as Transparency International, the emergence of metrics to highlight the cost and to quantify the damage of corruption. All of this was to push the international community to put the issue of corruption on the agenda. The second phase was the emergence of legal instruments then corruption was criminalized all over the world. And the third, and then prosecution of international companies and the high-level officials took place. And the third was the emergence of the management tools to address corruption, and I worked with a number of them, the ISO standards to address corruption. But today, with the hindsight, and after 3 decades, there is a consensus that all of this was not enough to address corruption. And nobody can tell you the contrary of this. And the reason, we are looking for, not for alternative solutions, because these solutions should remain, but they are not enough. We are looking for alternative, we are looking for approaches based on integrity and ethics. And what we have noticed also that countries which have relied too much on prosecution and enforcement, they failed to address corruption. I can give you and the most famous example, which is the clean hands investigation that took place in Italy in 1990, 40 years ago, 35 years ago. More than 800 people, high-level officials, including ministers and the 2 former ministers were jailed, were indicted and convicted, more than 800, including parliamentarians and senators and so on. A few years later, the corruption has increased again. And it's not only the persistence of corruption, but the normalization of corruption, because the convicted former Prime Minister Berlusconi won the election again. So this is what can happen when you rely too much on enforcement and compliance and in the legal system, because it can lead to the normalization of corruption. Because the second, there are a lot of other examples. Another example is the lavajato in Latin America. More than 800 people also jailed, but the corruption has increased. So nowadays, we look for solutions that solution combined with rules and compliance, but with ethics and integrity. And I would say today that there is an unprecedented opportunity to position Globethics and to position people like those who are working on ethics to lead the world, because the world is looking for solution, not classical solutions, for solutions that are based on ethics, based on integrity. I have done some research before coming to this conference to see and I did some research on 100 websites through artificial intelligence. What is the most frequently recurring word that comes with the most contemporary challenge, such as artificial intelligence, sustainable development, corruption? And I found that for artificial intelligence, the word that comes often in 100 websites is ethics, with 30%. The second is human rights, 20%. The third is employment, 15%. The fourth is vice, 10%, and regulation, 10%. Of course, this apart from the technical words, like all the technical neural network, deep learning, etc., etc. I did the same research 25 years ago when we started talking about the emergence of ICT, and when Geneva hosted in 2003 the World Summit on the Information Society. I was part of the organization of that summit within the United Nations, and I found that ethics was only mentioned 5%. So we see that after 20 years, ethics is the source of solution for the contemporary challenges. So this is an opportunity. I will terminate with this, but we have to change. It's good that to spread ethics education everywhere. But this is part of the solution. This is marvelous, but this is part of the solution. We should also target professionals. And when you target professionals, you won't teach them ethics, theoretical ethics, the ethics of Spinoza or Kant. They need professionals, they need the tools. If you teach them, in my experience, I have done a lot of training for professionals. If you teach them about ethics, theoretical ethics, they will look it as romantic, as Ethiopian, because these people are working in a greedy world. So they need heavy weapon. For this reason, people see that we can only end corruption with heavy weapon like prosecution and so on, but prosecution failed to end corruption, although it's important because prosecution is important to end the impunity. So nowadays we need to come up with some tools. Managers and professionals, they need tools to integrate tools. They don't need just theoretical knowledge. So this is just a call, if it could be considered by Globethics, to target professionals. They are looking for, they are aware that we cannot solve the problems the world is facing with the classical approaches, that we need new approaches based on human behavior, based on ethics, but we need to try to find the appropriate way to sell this knowledge, but in a different way, because managers, they understand the language of tools and the management. They don't understand the language of theoretical knowledge and of the rhetoric. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, okay, that was a powerful speech. You actually answered one of the other questions that I had already, so no need to ask it. Okay, so Max, go ahead.
Thank you. And again, I'm probably gonna repeat what has already been said, but with a different angle. I think the perception of compliance has evolved over the past 20 years, even 30 years, in connection with how the word grew more complex. Let me explain by analogy to our individual behavior. In my parents' generation, 30 years ago, it was easier to ignore the consequences of our individual consumption decisions. It was easier not to think about who is manufacturing our clothes, or about what's going to happen with my plastic straw when I throw it away, because we didn't. At 30 years ago, we had little visibility on the world around us. We were only focusing on the immediate, our immediate surroundings. It's the same for companies. 30 years ago, it was the Milton Friedman economy. Greed is good. It's important to focus on making profits. You have a duty to your shareholders to maximize your profits. Today, we live in a world that is more complex. We have more visibility on supply chains, on the impact of our actions, and it's the same thing for companies, for NGOs. It's more complicated. So of course, you have compliance, you have regulations, you have an inflation of regulation that are here to guide our choices and try to optimize them and make sure that when companies make money, they don't create too much damage, or they try to limit the impact they have. And that's compliance, that's sustainability, whatever you want to call it. But that's a framework to help guide organizations to make sure that they have a limited impact on their stakeholders. But so this lesson has been learned the hard way through scandals that have been discussed already. You had scandals even in the non-for-profit sector. I don't know if you followed the Oxfam scandal in 2017. You had a scandal with WWF in 2019. You have a lot of scandals also in organizations which are not profit-seeking. They're not looking to maximize their profit, but they're just not conscious of the impact they have on the communities where they operate. So more and more, you have rules that complexify the situation, but also you have individuals who want to be more ethical because they understand the consequences of their actions. So as a compliance professional, I've been approached more and more by people even without rule that come to me and say, hey, I want to do this new thing. I want to try this new approach. Do you think any problem with that? Do you see what the impact will be? And that's, for me, that's a good sign that people are being more ethical, not necessarily because they're becoming better people, but because they're better informed that what they're doing at their level can have impact on others and impact stakeholders.
Great, thank you. So cannot answer all the questions that are here, but we have time for one, I guess. And it's a one about trade-offs, which I always find interesting. I don't know if you have something to say about that, but so it's trade-offs between implementing compliance in a company, but that can somehow result in unethical behavior because you're trying to follow the rules. So, okay, Malika has something
to make short the long story, that's what we call lawful but awful. I think it's a very well-known concept in the compliance environment. Yes, indeed, compliance is compliance with the rule of law, and sometimes the rule of law, the procedure, the policy, the standard, ISO, etc. But as far as it's the compliance with standard, policy, and procedures, it can be awful. What makes the challenge interesting is when you add in the corpus of compliance the element of ethics, compliance with the mission, the values, the statement. And then it's not anymore lawful, but awful. It will be lawful and ethical. That's my short answer.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. I think the ideal, but it's the theoretical assumption, is to live without compliance, not compliance that have of objective to prevent wrongdoing, because we comply to the rules, to the normal rules. This is normal, there is no problem. But when you put compliance rules just to prevent wrongdoing, if people are honest enough, they can prevent wrongdoing themselves because they will do the right things. So the best program is to know how to reach the optimum between, because if you put less compliance, you can create gaps through which corruption and wrongdoings in general can occur. If you build a robust compliance program, you will have the opposite. So we need to know the culture, the ethical culture of the company. And through the ethical culture, you can build your compliance program. I received a number of professionals in training, and from a small discussion, I can understand the culture of company. It's the things that you can notice. The first, when you talk about people in company, is to detect the culture of the company. So working on the culture of company will, of course, you will of course need all the time compliance, because there will be always rules that you need to comply with, not to prevent wrongdoing, but to do things as they are planned in the organization. And this optimum is, as I said, is something that it's not easy to define. It's sometimes there are some countries, companies, they import experts just to put for them compliance program which worked in another company. It doesn't work like this. You have to create your own compliance program based on the culture of the organization.
Thank you. Just you mentioned trade-off, and I'm going to be very, very fast here. But yeah, it's a trade-off. If you want to do things, if you want to take other stakeholders' interest other than your own, you will have to leave money on the table. And that, I think Laurence said it yesterday, in some cases, there are no consequences to unethical decisions, meaning you will maximize your profit at the expense of others, but no one will force you to do otherwise. So, of course, if you want to, ethics is self-imposed. It has to be self-imposed in the sense that you have to feel like it's the right thing to do. It has to be valued in your culture. I'm not going to do this, even if that would make me richer, because that's not how things are done here. So it's a cultural thing, but it's also in an organization. It's not only about the incentives. It's also about how leadership behaves, leadership ethics, leadership by example. So it's not only setting a set of rules and a code, it's also creating the right culture.
And with that, thank you very much to the three panelists. We're out of time.
Thanks, everyone. We will now be starting the second round of panel. Moderator, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So after having a kind of a higher level view of the topic of ethics and compliance, this one, as you can see from the title, focuses more on the private sector. And for that, we have 5 wonderful panelists from a range of companies. So we have Alexander Finger, over there, from SAP Switzerland. He's the Chief Technology Officer. We have Klaus next to me from Novartis, who is member of the Executive Committee and Chief Ethics, Risk and Compliance, everything in one. We have Norman Beveridge, who's here. Who from the LYCRA company, former Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. And from the finance industry, we have 2 representatives. We have María Peña, who is from Symbiotics Asset Management. She is the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer. And last but not least, we have Melchior de Muralt from both PPT, his managing partner there, and co-founder of at Blue Orchard Finance. Okay, so as I mentioned, same deal as before, 2 rounds of questions. The questions are the same for everyone, and we will hear the different takes on the questions. And then a Q&A, so we have the code here, in case you want to ask some questions. So we just start. So for the first question, could you please let us know what your role is in your company, so we understand where you come from? And let us know a bit about how your company specifically approaches ethics and compliance, how this has evolved over time. And I think what is interesting to know is whether ethics is part of the company's DNA, or if it's something that you feel is more of a good to have or an add-on. So I don't know who wants to start. I want to go in the order. Okay, just okay.
No, thank you. I will start because I'm the finance guy. And finance is the most terrible beast to master and to understand. Very agile, very fluid, but very difficult to regulate. And if I give the example of the Puri Pictet Turritini, we are an investment company managing about 7 billion, so it's a boutique. But we co-founded Blue Orchard, happy to see Symbiotics here, creating over 20 years the proof that we can invest with an above the market financial rate and an impact. After 20 years, no one can object. Then we decided to launch a concept of funds engaging with portfolio companies. I'm very honored to see Novartis here, but we have a lot of shareholder engagement meeting with portfolio companies, trying to push a bit the boundaries and to play our role of shareholder. At the end, we are the fiduciary shareholders, all the shareholders of the companies, and we need to make our voice. And that's where ethics will come at the end of the discussion. But now we are in the middle of a huge wave of regulation, as you understand, which I think is a very good sign, but which is very tricky for us in finance, because the European Commission decided to launch the SFDR, Sustainable Financial Reporting Disclosure, before the CSRD, sorry for the jargon, which is the Corporate Society Reporting Disclosure. So that's a bit strange, but everybody is wanting to be fashionable, jump on the most sustainable article 8 or 9. I don't go in the detail, we could come back, it's a bit boring. But at the end, what we did is we don't take it personally, but we underweighted Nestlé a little bit and overweighted Unilever, for instance, due to the ISS ratings, which has no real impact, a little bit on boards, of course, because they want to be best in class and they will act, but there is no real additionality and intentionality. So my word here, and I will stop there, maybe we could take the discussion further, is we need, if we have an ethical angle as shareholders, somehow co-owners of the company, especially the big pension funds, they are really long-term shareholders and stakeholders of listed companies. We need to look at additionality. So there is a lot of data. There is a lot of effort of companies to solve their value chain negative externalities, to enhance their positive externalities. In the health sector, will be very interesting to hear you. There are a lot of effort for reaching the poorest, to providing a health solution to the excluded, and so on and so forth. But we as shareholders, we should accompany that. And I tell you how I believe we should do it. Geneva is the headquarters of the implementation of the SDGs. No doubt about that. We have all the operational agency of the UN, the humanitarians. I have the privilege to be member of the ICRC committee. And we tried a lot with the private sector to team up. So I believe that shareholders should, by one way or another, engage with portfolio company on partnership and blended finance. Symbiotics is a perfect example. They know how to blend financial products to achieve a financial and social return. So I think that's a very, very important dimension. And shareholders should not just keep computing data, which is the too easiest game. They should really try to engage with portfolio companies. Portfolio companies are willing to hear that. There are a lot of signs that in any case, regulators will understand the trick of those articles. And maybe next year or in 2 years' time, we might have one sustainable SFDR regulation, maybe another one called transition, which will ask more on active stewardship. UK adopted the UK stewardship code, which is quite compulsory. Switzerland recently adopted a Swiss stewardship code, meaning how do you behave as a shareholder, long-term shareholders with companies on your stewardship governance. So that's where I think we should end up the discussion, at least for the financial capital market view.
So since there's some relevance between the two, maybe María, and then we go for the industry.
Sure. First of all, thank you very much, Lila, for inviting me, and thank you to the audience because it's thank you to the Global Ethics Forum for this beautiful today's conference. So I planned to say something very quickly, but I'm sure you raised topics that are worth raising. So, but first, let me start with what my company is doing from an ethical standpoint and whether it's on the DNA of the company. So Symbiotics, what does it mean? It's the art of connecting people to establish, cultivate, and preserve the social relationship among members. So it's embedded in the name of the company. So yes, we have a social function related to finance. We try to provide the social function to finance. And for that, that is included in our vision, mission, and values of the company. And what is important is that we have a social charter where there are several principles that apply to all our investments and applies to all the investment process. So first principle is the geographical scope. We invest in emerging and frontier markets.
Second one is that we invest in the real economy. What does it mean? It means that we invest through private debt and private equity rather than investing in the stock exchange. Also, another important filter that you mentioned is the social rating. We use, for all of our investment, we use ESG criteria. So if there is not a social purpose in the investee, we stop. We don't invest in those companies. Another important topic is that we try to create a long-term value investment. We don't buy and sell, we invest, and we try to keep that in the long term. Something important is that we promote financial inclusion, that is through microfinance. And also we promote entrepreneurship and we promote employment through small and medium enterprises. And to whom? We try to go there where others don't go. We go to the base of the pyramid, so to the poorest of the poorest. And that is what Symbiotics intends to do. Maybe very quickly, let me speak about compliance, because I also have that hat. As a financial entity regulated by FINMA, we are bound to a code of conduct. And we have several duties: fiduciary duty, duty of loyalty, and duty of information, transparency. So we are bound to our investors. So we need to comply with all those principles to make sure that the market is respected. A very quick word to say that from a shareholding standpoint, half of the shareholders of the company are employees of the company. The other half are friends and family. So at the end of the day, we don't have a big shareholder behind who is asking us to provide benefits, but that also creates a different atmosphere in the company. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I don't know if Alexander, we go back to you and come.
Yeah, happy to continue. Yeah, thank you very much for the kind invitation, the opportunity to be here. SAP's motto is to help the world run better and improve people's lives. And I don't know who of you know SAP. Me? Yeah, some don't. I'm very confident that every single one of you has already been in touch with our software, because we provide software for organizations to operate, to do the P&L in the end, but everything around it. So everything you need to run a company is what we provide in software. We are a 50-year-old startup from Walldorf in Germany, one of the last European big software companies. We have a global footprint. We are represented in all markets. And in fact, when I say that all of you have been in touch with us, it means that more of 90% of the products in the world go at one point or the other through an SAP system, either during production, during logistics, or during retail. And if you look into Switzerland, we have a very, very strong customer base here, and the large retailers are using SAP to fulfill their customers' needs. My role in SAP is the role of the CTO for SAP Switzerland. As such, I'm dealing with innovation. So I'm talking to our own organization about innovation, freshening up the skills, introducing new technology to our own employees. And I'm having a lot of discussions with our customers, existing customers, new customers, and startups about how they can use the technology which we provide them, which is emerging, to create more value for their customers. And that's actually the most rewarding moment, when we see that our customers are using our software to create something for their customers and moving that forward. So the answer to your question was a bit in my first phrase when I said we help the world run better and improve people's lives. So ethics is part of our DNA. It's deeply rooted in the way we run our business ourselves and the way we interact with each other inside our company, but as well in the way how we interact on markets. And that makes some things very, very easy for us. Some things become more difficult. In the panel before, we heard already about diverging interests, about incentives, specifically in sales, and there are definitely things to discuss. And we invest a lot in making that happen. One last word from the CTO, because I'm the technology guy and the innovation guy. AI has made many people aware of what software can bring as a risk. And now we are having a discussion about ethics led by AI or spearheaded by AI, which is overdue because the risks imposed by AI are very visible. We see this currently because all of you have probably tried out ChatGPT and were amazed and surprised what it can do. Asked yourselves probably, will it take my job? Will it take somebody else's jobs? But this is a discussion which is overdue for decades because software has already had these inherent risks before, and software had always to be used in not only a compliant fashion, but in an ethical way.
Thanks very much for inviting me. My name is Norman Beveridge, and formerly the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer of the LYCRA company. So I spent the last 35 years, I joined as an engineer, worked in operations, sales and marketing, moved to Geneva to take up a finance role, also worked in the US in R&D. In 2004, reinvented myself into compliance, and been working in compliance since then. So we're the LYCRA company. We make the LYCRA fiber that goes into all your garments. So whether that be ready to wear, swimwear, lingerie. We also produce fiber that goes into nappies as well for the leg and the cuffs. We're basically in an unregulated industry. And so my role, to answer your first question, is really to ensure that we have good corporate processes, that we have people that are well trained and know how to react, when they encounter a sticky situation. And the why behind that is we want to protect the company, we want to protect the shareholders, we want to protect the directors of the company and the employees against reputational risk or fines and penalties. So what do? I used to run the ethics and compliance program. So starts with the code. We have compliance standards across the different areas of law that we need to comply with in our business. Of course, we do our due diligence on our partners. The most important thing is pick the right partners that you want to work with. So do the diligence on that. Also involved in investigations when things go wrong. And then one of the tools that I was quite pleased of running about was the ECS, which is our ethical compliance scenarios. And this is where we gave groups of people small scenarios, very simple scenarios, to sit down and talk about in an unthreatening way about how basically we would have a one page for the participants and one page for the leaders, and teams of people would sit down and talk about these scenarios to sort of prepare them, get their sort of muscle memory. This sort of situation came along, this is how they would react. And then we provided a leader guide so that, if these topics didn't come up, then they should reinforce them, link them back to the code of conduct, link them back to our compliance standards. As far as the question about how do we approach ethics and compliance, I think similar to Alex, it's in our DNA. So I started back in DuPont, where safety compliance was exceptionally important. And a little bit of history, DuPont's been around for a long time, but back in 1818, there was a major explosion at their explosive factory. And the leaders at the time then decided that the best thing to do to improve the safety was to move the plant manager's house closer to the plant. And that's what they did, and safety improved. So that's how the DNA, how safety got into safety compliance, safety with the EHS got into DuPont. And then for Koch Industries, Charles Koch, who was one of the key owners, along with David Koch. In the DNA for that company, I was very lucky that that they were able to. The tone of the top basically was all about compliance first before business. And he even Charles Koch would tell the story that he would step out of a business such as the tarmac business because he couldn't get comfortable about the corruption in the business. And so he really put his money where his mouth was. And so for us, it was embedded there in the principles: principle 1, integrity; principle 2, compliance. And then so when Koch Industries sold the LYCRA business, the LYCRA company was formed. Basically we stood up the compliance program and took the best of the last couple of companies. And yeah, that's basically how compliance evolved.
Yeah, I would a little bit maybe give it a different twist, to be honest. if you talk about a leading question, maybe if ethics is in the DNA of a company, I mean, it's a tricky question, to be honest. If you look at the pharma industry, that's maybe the industry which is, for the right reasons, on the highest scrutiny of all industries, because we are an industry which is the closest to human life and health. This is a great responsibility. This brings the eternal ethical dilemma. Can you do health for profit? That's basically the eternal dilemma we have in the industry. So therefore, I would phrase it, if you talk about the DNA, a little bit different. I would say ethical dilemmas are basically neighbors and passengers in our journey in the industry from the very early research, because it's an ethical question. Where do you research? What are the bioethical boundaries for research? If you think about cell and gene therapy, for example, over classical dilemmas like animal testing, that's, by the way, a classic that you can't solve an ethical dilemma, because you either hurt the animals or you stop innovation for the patients. And we just try to find the right transparency and discussion around this to handle this ethical dilemma, but you can't solve it at the time being. Maybe in 10 years, if AI allows us to do all the animal testing in AI bots or in AI sculptured animals, it's maybe a different thing. But at the moment, the sense of science, there's not a lot of it. So it's really one of these classical dilemmas. The other dilemmas go to the commercializing of our drugs, they are manufacturing. So I would say the DNA, I would be careful to say it's in a company. I would say you judge a company how open, honest a company addresses and discusses the ethical dilemmas. There is no perfect organization on this earth, not on the public, not on the private side. There's no perfect society. We're all part of it. So I would always say, stay humble. Measure what do we do, how to address ethical dilemmas, how we help our people. How we approach this at Novartis is a bit different as most of the companies, because we said we have to support our colleagues in a more holistic way. So the problem of compliance is, it was in the previous panel, it's legal compliance, you need it, and the regulatory, fully regulated industry and finance is the same. We know what this means, a lot of work already, but it's not sufficient, this is clear. You have risk management. At the end, your ethical discussions give the boundaries in which risks you want to go. So you should keep risk and crisis management close to you. So what we did in the company, and we are on this journey, what we call integrated assurance based on ethical discussions, is to bring the ethics discussion, the risk management, crisis management, governance, compliance, together in one organization, which is not owning ethics. No one owns ethics in a company, but is able to foster with foresights dialogue on ethical dilemmas. And you raised AI already, which definitely is for all of us an unsolved topic from an ethics point of view, huge opportunities and also risks. So this ethical discussion is the basis for our approach to bring risk management, crisis management, governance, compliance together to support the whole challenges we have in our industry more holistically. And always the advice, stay humble. Things happen in big companies always. We employ 80,000 people around the globe. We are in all countries you can imagine. And the question is, how do you deal with ethical topics when they come up?
Thank you. So I will ask my second question. I just don't know if there are questions from the audience. For the moment, I cannot see any. So if you have any, or if I should be seeing and I don't see them, please let me know. So the second question is the classic challenges and opportunities questions. So if you could let us know what are some of the difficulties or challenges that you encounter when we talk about ethics and compliance in your organization, and of course, any opportunities that you may see related to those topics. Thank you.
We take the same order. Yes, I have in mind a very striking example on the tension between regulation and ethics. Stellantis, a famous car company moving towards new mobility and electric vehicle, is fighting against, in the UK, is sued in the UK on complicity through the Slavery Act, because they are sourcing through a Chinese supplier in RDC, involuntary, of course, illegal artisanal cobalt. Amnesty International produced a very deep report, and the University of Geneva contributed as well with a very interesting paper on that. And so we as investors, being Article 6, 8 or 9, sorry for the jargon again, if we are Article 6, we will just have a sort of very easy calculation saying that what will be the cost of the lawyers to win, because they will win at the end, and what the benefits of having just-in-time large sourcing of cobalt in the tough battles with the Chinese, in fact. You are Article 8, you are a little bit in a difficult position, so you will weigh the next rating of, let's say, ISS. By a chance, the rating may increase due to other criteria, so the aggregated rating might increase, so you will not change the position, or decrease, you might sell a little bit your position, but that will not change at all the situation for the children, for the forest, for the fragility, the conflict arising there. In Article 9, having the intentionality of impact might be a little bit, might be a bit more tricky. So they might or sell or start to engage. But in engaging, they mainly will ask the company to get rid of that Chinese supplier, which is a very good company, by the way. So we had the idea, trapped into that corner of regulation, having no impact on the field. We decided to join some other shareholders in the industry digitalization and energy transition, and try to identify low-hanging formalization program on cobalt, just to show the example, try to link it to the Chinese supplier or to another one, and at the end to Tesla, Stellantis, Volkswagen, and so on. Companies are quite interested, and so there is, and Geneva is the perfect place for doing that. We did not give up yet, but the striking story is the following. We started to discuss with one of the biggest trader on cobalt. I will not name them here, but they are full of goodwill. And they had a small formalization program in RDC, and saying, okay, we will help you and we will help you in addressing SDC, USAID. A lot of DFIs would be very interested to provide technical assistance and so on. So, and the head of sustainability of that company was enthusiastic, saying, at the end, there are some shareholders and financial players interested about those issues. That's a good for me. I will come back to you. I will consult the executive committee and so on. After a few months, he came back saying, okay, we decided to stop the formalization program. It's too risky. It showed that partnership is so important, because alone, RDC is too risky, full stop. But the executive committee told me we have no end client needs. So what does that mean? It means that the shareholders are not present. Because at the end, the CEO here has to run the company, know that there are regulation, compliance issue, potential fines, and so on. And you know that the Chinese competition is a tough game and so on. But if the owner at the end is not pushing towards formalizing and enhancing the resilience of the value chain, as shareholders, nothing will happen. And that's where I distinguish regulation, because nobody in regulation is pushing toward that. And ethics. And that's why I believe at the end, the next wave will be on stewardship. If you look closely to the UK stewardship code, it's much more driven by transition, accompanying the transition, it being a facilitator. In Geneva, we have so many opportunities. IFC is sending a guy at the ILO to potentially scale up the Better Work program. I believe you are a member of that, which is a textile public-private initiative, on extraction and maybe other sectors. So there are plenty of goodwill, and shareholders needs to be there saying, we could help you join forces with the public sectors through blended finance, foundation, and so on. So that's a bit my appeal of going beyond ESG, beyond regulation, through a sort of a will of ethic.
Thank you. So I guess we just keep the same order as before. I think we can just keep the rest of the time for this question. And,
well, I will try to be quick, so I will leave time to the others. So maybe for us, what is important is that in all our agreements, we have as a condition precedent, we have a list of exclusion activities, or either activities or products or financing activities or products. So what is important is that when we invest in a company, they don't go through that list of activities, which is alcoholic beverages, it's pornography, it's tobacco, it's weapons, pesticide. There are several, there is a list of activities that are not allowed. What normally happens, I think we are very lucky because at the end of the day, those who raise concern about that list of exclusions are people who are really concerned and who read the agreements from A to Z. So they come back from time to time with several questions because they want to do things well, maybe because they are producing kitchen knives or things like that that might be considered as weapon. So we have been very, very lucky for the time being. In any case, we have the financial analysts who are on the field who are monitoring the investees. There is a regular reporting taking place. There is a communication ongoing. There is data, there is reporting that is being analyzed. So that is very important to avoid having any trouble. Worst case scenario will be fraud. And I think I'm very lucky because since I work at Symbiotics for 10 years, I think we only had 2 cases. One, it was a little bit a pity because it was a very beautiful cooperative where the owner, she did such a great work that at the end of the day, she thought she could be whichever she wanted. So take the money for the wedding of her son or things like that. So in that cases, there is, it's an event of default, again, coming back to the agreement, and that allows us to accelerate, which is really the ultimate solution because we are a long-term investment company, but there is the solution that we can foresee. I leave it there, so I leave time for my colleagues.
I try to be short as well. So obviously, as a globally acting software provider, we sell software, we sell services, and the moment you have a salesperson and you, I think Maximilien, this was what you referred to as well, you have an incentive for the salesperson, and depending on the personal situation of that person, there might be a conflict and the person might be tempted to do things he or she shouldn't be doing. The way we tackle this is with a lot of education, formalized education, which we document, but as well with a spirit in which people can speak up. Because Klaus, you said things will go wrong, so things will definitely go wrong. We are a couple of more employees, but not too many. But among this large group of people you have in an organization, one person will do a mistake. And then the question is, how do you deal with a mistake? Can we learn as an organization from it? And can we make sure that it's not systematic? And systematic, we as managers and leaders can influence that. We can change procedures, we can change processes, we can govern them, and we can take this topic seriously and not treat it as a compliance topic, which often gets a bit disregarded, though it shouldn't be. Right? We can give people the confidence to step up if they see that something is wrong and act accordingly. And if you've read the news today, you just have a very prominent example of SAP acting very, very consistently, and the person involved acting very, very consistently, which has my high respect.
So in the LYCRA company, maybe sort of to touch on one of the challenges of ESG, and ESG has been very close to the heart of the LYCRA company for many, many years. And about 16 years ago, we put out Planet Agenda, which is really our framework as how we're going to move forward with it. But one of the challenges, because there's only a few grams of LYCRA in your garments, is that we have literally thousands of retailers coming to us because of the due diligence regulations. It says you have to look up in your supply chain, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But there's a lot of waste in there, and I think there's an opportunity there for some efficiencies, because every retailer has their own processes. Yes, there are some sort of aggregators that you can submit your information to, and then the retailers can have a look at you as the company, whether have you got forced labor, do you pay your people, do you have excessive overtime. We have people coming to us every single day asking, can we have a half-day audit at the manufacturing plant? And we're literally having to hire more and more people to fill out these questionnaires, host the audits. We've got certification companies that are coming in and asking the same questions that they did the week before. So I think that the legislation is absolutely in the right place. There's lots of people trying to do the right thing, but we're stuck a little bit in the red tape situation where lots of waste. A lot of people are making money in the middle, offering these audits and certifications, and I think everyone can do a much better job there.
Super great point. And if compliance becomes bureaucracy, compliance fatigue kicks in, and then the game is over. So maybe a completely different area. I mean, we have to take everyday decisions on third parties, on investments, on M&A, in licensing, take decisions risk-based, therefore risk management is so important. What about hiring? So, I mean, we train people when they arrive at the company on ethics, compliance, risk management. But what if we would start earlier? So what we are exploring at the moment is we bring ethics questions, dilemmas into the hiring process. Super interesting, because normally you check CVs, you check, experience, but how would a very experienced scientist or saleswoman react? And we try this now out by surprise if there's suddenly an ethics question in the hiring discussion. So for example, your boss tells you you have to achieve the numbers, you can't do it, what do you do? Super surprising, interesting. I mean, again, it's an early start, but I think when we talk about the ethics forum here on these ethics dilemmas, if we get people into a company, I think we need to start earlier to think, do we as a company make clear for what we are standing and that we want to have the right mindset already in the recruitment process?
Okay, thank you. So we have a couple of questions, but they are very specific. So I don't know if anyone would like to add something more on the general front. We don't have too much time. Okay, so do I put Alexander in the hot seat? Okay.
There's one question.
Okay. Which is more general, or? Okay, go for it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I think it's very important that, oh, by the way, Kushwan Singh, I'm head of Secretariat of the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development, which is attached to the German Development Cooperation Agency, GRZ. I think, Alexander, you will know GRZ from your colleagues. My question is, first of all, I appreciate that you speak up publicly. I think especially for people who are not so experienced and are part of a different world, not of the business world, but speak a lot about business people and especially the pharma industry. I hear a lot of negative conversations, of course, in private rounds that you are just very greedy and so on, all these stereotypes. But it's, I think, very important to speak publicly about such an important issue as ethics. And I applaud Globethics that they invited you, because in our context, we speak with religious people, we speak with politicians, but very rarely we speak with those people who really make money. So I think that's very important. One request I have, I think the time is over, but perhaps afterwards, it would have been very good to hear from a very concrete challenge you had in your company where you had to make a decision. I think, Klaus, you referred to dilemma. You have dilemmas, but at the end of the day, the people in the management need to take a decision. And what were situations where you said, actually, we could have earned a lot of money, but we did not go for it? How did you make it transparent? What was the communication? And what were the learnings for the next generation of managers? That is what I'm interested in. And then I have a very specific question, so I will come to this later on to SAP, but it's related to ethics. We must work with SAP in our company. And that process started, I don't know, 20 years back. It feels a bit like a code I must wear. And now if I want to get rid of the code, it's so heavy that I cannot actually get rid of the code. And then you come and the salesperson comes and say, yeah, of course, there are a lot of other products. Feel free to go for another product. But actually, it's very difficult if you have 30,000 employees to change the whole system. We are now updating the SAP thing. I do not want to tell you what's going on in our company. So it feels like the code is there for all of your life, and you come and you say, I can give you a new button here and there, but actually you cannot get rid of the code. So it's also a question of the business model being so like monopolized, where I think, okay, going for open source, is it really an alternative? I know it's might be a bit unfair, the question, but it just came up to my mind. Thank you.
It's a question I receive very often. Happy to discuss that later with you. Just let me say, if you put many things in your code gets heavier.
Unless someone else wants to say a final word, but we are past time.
No, we're good. Okay, so thank you very much for this interesting discussion. And, thank you to the audience.